Welcome to the We as Nature podcast, where inspiring visionaries share their personal stories of living in alignment with the more than human world, and how this informs their unique contribution to cultivating a flourishing future for life on Earth. Each month, We as Nature features a new storyteller, sharing their experience of how listening to and learning from diverse forms of life has altered their course. The power of story lies within each of us, offering a portal to the language of the heart, connecting us to our feelings as a source of inspiration and courage from which we can act. For those of us seeking to create a flourishing world, starting right where we are, these We as Nature stories offer a space to listen, contemplate, and envision new possibilities. We as Nature is brought to you by Flourishing Diversity, and you can find out more about who we are and what we do at the end of the episode, as well as in the show notes. Today we're joined by Elsie Harp, founder of Divina Botanica, where she combines trauma-informed mental health, nature connection, and floristry. Elsie's story takes us on a journey into the expansiveness, wonder, play, and connection that arise through being present with and sensing the aliveness that is everywhere around us. And she explores the possibility and power this holds for healing and integrating challenging experiences, both our own and those of our ancestors. Before Elsie begins, we'll leave a 10-second pause, allowing you to settle into a space of listening. Start by observing the space around you. As you slow down your thinking mind, notice where your feet are making contact with the ground. Observe your breath as it comes and goes from your body in an interchange with the environment around you.
I just want to begin by saying thank you and expressing my gratitude for you all being here. It's a real honour to sit with the recognition that there are other people across the world that are interested in deepening their relationship with nature. Working this way can be quite lonely. And so I was really pleased when Flourishing Diversity approached me and invited me to come and share in this space. So just extending my thanks first off. So to begin, I didn't always understand why nature was reaching out to me, but I've always had a connection with the more than human world. And so in the beginning, there was my mother and my father. My mum was raised in the townships in South Africa during the height of the apartheid. And my dad was a welder fabricator from the UK who had gone to South Africa to work. My mother met my father. They fell in love against all odds, despite a regime that was built to keep them apart. And so they made the extremely brave decision to leave South Africa and move to the UK, which was quite treacherous for my mum and also in many ways very painful, being taken away from everything she knows to come to the UK to start a family. So my mum landed in the countryside in Gloucestershire, where my dad's family were residing. And after one or two moves across the county, we settled in a suburb in Gloucester, which is about 10 or 20 miles from Bristol currently. And I am one of three. So I have an older brother and a younger sister. And we grew up in a cul-de-sac surrounded by children. And these kind of edge spaces I find very interesting. So currently I grow flowers on a community farm, which is also on the edge of Bristol. And I was raised on the edge of a city. And so on one side, we had this kind of sprawling suburbia. And on the other side, we had sheep. And so we had this expanse of the outdoors to explore. And being one of 12 children in this space was incredibly exciting. Some of the key sort of moments I remember from my upbringing in that space was just how much we felt we belonged to the outdoors, and how little fear we had in encountering spaces in nature. So we would play with the trees, we would name the trees, we would get in the streams, we would touch the algae, we would crawl through muddy and dark tunnels. And this left a really important imprint on me. And I think the imprint that it really left with me is this sense of belonging to the outdoors and belonging to nature. And I think throughout this period of time in my life, there was a real recognition that nature was alive and breathing and communicating with me. So I had some very interesting experiences as a child with communicating with things. And so I was raised Catholic. So I've always had this kind of acute awareness of something greater than me. And I think Catholicism sort of imbues in you this sense of this patriarchal God who is listening to you in some way and is judging you and judging your thoughts and whether they're good thoughts or bad thoughts. But as a child, I seemed to lean one step further than that in thinking and believing and living in a world where everything was alive. And so that would be inanimate objects, you know, like rocks or twigs or the dirt underneath my fingernails. I had this real sense of the aliveness of all and a real desire to develop a capacity to listen to the messages that these objects had for me. And so everything became very precious. And I was quite a curious child. And as an adult, I met with one of the children that I grew up with. And she reminded me of this thing that I used to do. So she said to me, she's like, "Oh, do you remember you used to say things twice?" And I was like, "Did I?" And she's like, "Yeah, you used to say things twice. You used to say something out loud and then you'd whisper it under your hand." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I do." And I did do that. And I remember having this kind of checking system because my internal world and my relationship to the external world was so multifaceted and almost multidimensional that whenever I was communicating with somebody, I had to check that what I was saying made sense. So I would think about what I would say before I said it, and then I would say it out loud, and then I'd whisper it to myself to make sure that it made sense. And so I had this this kind of a multiplicitous way of experiencing the world around me, and this recognition that my relationship to the world might be quite different to other people's. And also kind of within that, this real understanding that plants had the capacity to communicate with me. And I think that this is innate in children anyway, and you can really witness it in the way that some children play. But I remember kind of if I'd been through a tunnel, if I'd been through a thicket, and I've got very curly hair, and I'd often have like twigs and leaves stuck in my hair, and I still do to this day. And as a child, I would convince myself that that was the spirits playing with me, and that leaving twigs and leaves in my hair was their way of communicating with me. So everything was very, I was always in a dialogue with something or someone, some spirit or other, as a child. And one of the other experiences that I had, which is still very live for me today because it was so constant, was it particularly happened at night during the summer. So I would lie back on the tarmac in our cul-de-sac and look at the stars. And I'd hear this kind of humming. And my friends at the time would always be like, Elsie, it's the M5, because we grew up near the M5. So they'd be like, it's the sound of the cars going along the M5. And I was like, no, it's the North Pole. And this is what I'd always said to myself. It's the sound of the North Pole. And as an adult, I've like, to me, what I was hearing is almost the frequency of the earth. And as a now that the internet and stuff is happening, and people are kind of exploring these ideas more, there was this, I discovered these kind of binaural beats online, and these were similar to the sounds that I would hear quite often as a child during the summer. And so, I think as a child, I was very open and able to listen to messages and frequencies that were coming through, both from the plant kingdom, but also from the cosmos, which I lost at various points kind of during my life. So I spent my childhood in this kind of very open way, but as an adult, that kind of started to close down. So for secondary school, I went to quite a rough Catholic comprehensive. I think 10% of my year got 5 A to C GCSEs. And so my focus completely shifted from that space of kind of play and adventure to like forming my identity as a teenager. And I think that is a rite of passage in its own right, really, is that process that we all go through of forming a sense of self and this desire to belong to a tribe, and how much of ourself we will sacrifice to feel a sense of belonging. And in my later teens, I got my first boyfriend, who was a vegetarian, and his mum was a vegetarian, and they kind of reminded me of the importance of looking after the environment. And I remember getting a real scolding from my boyfriend because we were eating pizza, and I decided to chuck the pizza box in the bush. And he gave me such a scolding. And it left this really big imprint on me. It was like, whoa, okay. There's such a level of disconnect between me and my actions and the impact that it's having on the world, that I really need to kind of take stock of who I am and what I'm doing and how I'm behaving. And he was an artist, and he went on to art college in the local town, which was Stroud. And we had a free party in a field for his birthday. And after kind of going to this quite rough comprehensive to kind of back in the field and listening to music, that was another kind of introduction to a different group of people who really had a love for the outdoors and had a real deep love for nature. And there was one person in particular who I met during that period of time in my life that really reignited this sort of passion for nature and for the outdoors. And her name is Katie, and she's one of my best friends. And we've been on many an adventure together in the 20 or so years that we've known each other. But one of the things that I started to do is I started to spend more time outdoors, and made that shift from kind of smoking fags in the local park and drinking cheap cider to going on long walks for the sake of walking. You know, as a teenager, you spend time outdoors just to hang out with your friends and to kind of reclaim the experience of being in nature for the sake of being in nature was a really important part of my journey. And at one point, Katie, I think it was for a birthday, she gave me a Burt's Bees lip balm, which at the time was made of 5 different ingredients. It was an oil, a wax, and a couple of different essential oils. And I remember looking on the back of this packet, and for the first time, they'd written the Latin, but they'd also written the English. So I could understand what each of these ingredients were inside this lip balm. And I had this realization that I could make it myself. And all of the ingredients in that lip balm I knew. And that moment is probably one of the most empowering moments I think that I've had in my life, is realizing that the things that I use every day on my skin, that I could make myself. So I went off to university, and my first job at university was working at Culpeppers, which for people in the UK you might remember was a herbal shop. It was a high street herbal shop. And so we sold essential oils, herbal remedies, dried teas, and fresh herbs. And it was in that stall that I really kind of cut my teeth in understanding the functionality of herbs. And what was kind of sitting alongside that was this kind of deepening relationship to the outdoors. And at that time, I started to feel like I was living a sort of dual life, as it were. One is like navigating the social spaces and the social pressures of university, and 2, finding solace and strength and comfort in being in the outdoors. And I was quite a rebellious and slightly odd student, I would say. So I would often like go for a walk, make myself some kind of elaborate and quite strange headpiece, and decorate my bike in ivy leaves and things that I'd gathered, and kind of cycle through town. And so I think there was a part of me that really reveled in being different, but then also a real big part of me that felt isolated in that experience of connecting with nature in this way. And slowly, sort of during my university experience, and having this sense of 2 sides, a kind of social side, and the sense of me that wanted to belong and feel a sense of community, and this other side of developing this relationship with the herbal kingdom and with the plant world. Those felt like 2 very separate things. I started to develop quite a lot of anxiety. And this anxiety at times was incredibly debilitating. I had to take a break from university between my second and my third year, because I was really struggling to function. I found it really overwhelming to be around people. The only real place that I felt a sense of peace was outdoors. And I remember one kind of quite profound moment. There's been a few, but one of the most clear ones was feeling really very hyper aroused in my nervous system. So I'd have heart palpitations quite a lot, a feeling of knots inside my stomach, and a shaking. And this had started to build and build and build whilst I was at home, and I decided to go for a walk. And there was drive in my body to kind of mobilize this energy, which I recognize now as a way of kind of moving through states of trauma, is that need to kind of mobilize the fight or flight response that's happening inside the body. And so I walked and 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 I walked, and I must have walked for about 5 or 6 miles out of Oxford. And I just kept going. And I came across this birch wood, and it was quite new growth. And you know, those new growth birch woods, everything is kind of slim and skinny and straight. And that's not usually the kinds of woodlands that I like to go into. But this one was really kind of calling to me. So I decided to go in to this birch wood, and I was still feeling really anxious. And by this point, the kind of thoughts were swirling in my head, this sense of not being good enough, of not fitting in, of not being able to get through the day. And I just decided to lie down. So I put my back against this tree, and it was a very skinny, it was only a little tree. And so I leant backwards against this birch tree and closed my eyes for a minute. And gently and slowly over time, as my heart rate began to decrease, the sound of the environment in which I was in became louder. And I noticed the wind blowing through these birch leaves, and I hadn't ever really noticed the sound of wind through birch leaves before, but it's so exquisite. It's really beautiful, very gentle sort of fluttering sound. And my felt sense at this point was to lie down. So I laid down underneath this birch tree, and sort of looked up through the canopy and felt this feeling of being enveloped by the trees around me. And I'm not sure how long I was in there for. It must have been a good amount of time. But the combination of feeling my body against the earth, of the sound and the sight of these leaves, really settled my nervous system. And at the point at which I kind of got up and decided to return home, I felt like a different person. And this moment really stuck with me, because I had this felt understanding of the transformative power of nature. When you allow yourself to really be in that present moment, and this engaged in this kind of multi-sensory experience, there is something innate inside the body that matches the energy of the natural world around you, and it's soothing. And for somebody who has struggled with anxiety for such a long period of time in my life, to have an experience like that, where I felt so different, was an incredible gift that was given to me. And my friend bought me a Trioem book by Glennie Kindred, who is a nature writer. And I had a look today at the birch in this Trioem book. And the themes that you can explore through birch are new starts, new beginnings, rebirth. And I feel like, and nourishment as well. And I really feel like that was what I received from that moment in the birch wood, is a sense of a new beginning, of a baptism almost in nature. And so from then, my relationship to the natural world began to take on much more of an energetic dynamic. So prior to that, I was working with herbs in a very much like, this herb is good for this, in a symptom kind of matching way. But from that experience, really recognizing that actually nature is communicating with us in this very subtle but very deep way, and there is something innate in the human that can connect with that. I fell pregnant in my final year of university and had my son. And And that came with its own sense of initiation and challenges and constraints as well, I would say. So my ability to do and be shifted quite a lot, and so did my sort of outlook in a very way. I'd spent a lot of my life really looking outwards at the world, but having a child really brings all of your focus back into yourself and into the raising of this child. And as I was raising my son, I really noticed certain patterns that kind of kept repeating themselves, and these difficulties and depressions that would arise in me that didn't necessarily feel like mine. I really recognized that despite some, difficulty around the circumstances around my son's birth, that on the whole, I was taken care of. All of my needs were met. I was loved by the people that were around me, but I couldn't quite shake this feeling of a lack of safety and a lack of security. And it would come from nowhere and sit with me for quite some time. And at this time I was working for the NHS. So I worked in secondary mental health services with adults with severe and enduring mental health difficulties. And it was through working alongside kind of psychiatrists and psychologists and really getting that understanding of how trauma manifests itself from person to person. There is also this recognition within the mental health field that trauma can be passed down your family line. So they do family systemics, which is essentially where you look at your family tree and you look at the experiences of your parents and your grandparents. And I remember sitting in a session with a psychologist as she was talking me through this process. And I hadn't ever thought to look back at my lineage, but it's so close to me. My mother was raised in this experience, in this environment, in this experience where the level of oppression that she received was inhumane, and that she was taken, or she chose to leave the country out of very difficult circumstances, but chose to leave the country, and the pain and the separation of that was never really dealt with. And I began to realize that so much of my difficulty in my with my mental and emotional health came from this lineage. And so the mental health system works in a particular way where they look at the biochemistry of the brain, essentially. And one of the treatment pathways for people that were experiencing these severe and enduring mental health difficulties is one is a certain amount of talking therapy, and the other is drugs. And so that was never going to be the way in which I dealt with my own mental health. I was always going to have a look at what was happening biochemically, yes, but also emotionally, what was happening in my energetic field, what was happening in my environment around me, thinking about my nutrition. And so going sort of down this route of thinking and researching epigenetics, this practice that was developing in me around working with nature and connecting with nature to support my mental health became a passionate and fervent source of strength. And whenever I really felt myself wavering, the first place I would go would be to the woods. And the first thing that I would do is I would be with a tree. And over time, I'm trying to remember the first time I came across a flower essence. I think the first flower essence I journeyed with was dandelion. And I really like the symbolism around a dandelion. It's this really, really strong tap root. It's called a dynamic accumulator. It brings nourishment and minerals from deep in the soil and brings it up to the upper kind of crust of soil for the benefit of all of the other plants that are around it. And I was working with dandelion at the time because I was having issues with taking up space, with feelings of low self-worth and low self-confidence. And dandelion has this incredible way of really anchoring you into your sense of self, ultimately. And it was from having, again, another sort of transformative experience with the energetics present within the plant kingdom, really solidified my dedication to working in this way. And so my way of kind of moving through difficult states over time has really been working with nature connection, but also working with flower essences. And I really appreciate the way that flowers communicate to us, because they really ask us to get to the heart of the matter. There is a nuance to working with them. And they really invite you to put your finger on exactly what it is that's going on, you know. So, for example, a person who might be struggling with speaking up at work, you know, that could come from a multitude of different ways. And there would be a different flower essence for somebody who might be struggling to speak up because they feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Or there would be a different flower essence for somebody who was struggling with assertiveness and taking up space. And so the flower kingdom, the more that you listen, the more nuanced the message becomes, and the deeper you can get to the core of who you are. And I really give thanks to the experiences that I've had with nature, because I know now why nature has been calling me. Through nature, I've developed a sense of belonging. And through nature, I've developed an ability to really deeply trust myself. And through nature, I've developed an ability to connect to myself first and foremost, which allows me to connect to other people in a really deep and rich way.
We'd like to extend a big thank you to Elsie for sharing her beautiful story. And thanks to you for being here. If you'd like to learn more about Elsie's work, you'll find links in the show notes. We hope you're enjoying the We as Nature podcast. And if you are, we'd love you to share it with others who might enjoy it too. You can also leave us a review, which is a great way to help spread the word. The We as Nature podcast is recorded live during an online gathering, where each month a new guest shares their story and attendees enjoy the opportunity to connect with other listeners. You can find a link to our upcoming We as Nature live events, which are free to attend, in the show notes. We as Nature is brought to you by Flourishing Diversity, an initiative bringing together voices from all over the world to explore humanity's interconnection with the lands, waters, forests, and fellow species. Flourishing Diversity is a path towards a vibrant future and offers a collective approach in response to climate breakdown and biodiversity loss. We create spaces to listen to and learn from all life, raise critical questions, search for alternative answers, and amplify generative biocultural practices. You can register to receive updates and inspiration from us at flourishingdiversity.com, as well as finding us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. All the links are in the show notes. Thanks for being here, and we hope you'll join us again soon.